Okay, here's my latest and greatest spread for my TV shows of my youth pop-up book. This little one took about 3 weeks. Don't even get me started on all of the trials and tribulations. But here it is. Da-da-da. It is for Westerns. So, to make it fold perfectly flat, I mean, these will stand up straight if folded perfectly flat. You really need to flex it a little. So sometimes people put them on what's called, not that most of you care, but I learned this, an extended platform where the top, where the center is higher than the sides, so when it's open it bows and pushes up. I tried putting this inside after the fact, since I just learned about this with some help from Duncan Birmingham. I appreciate. But then, of course, if you close the whole thing, it's too wide for my page. So I'll just put it on this for right now to help flex it so we can look at it. But actually, well, I was going to pick up the camera maybe, but that might make you all nauseated. So I tell you what, I will do a quick tour of this. Let me just prop this up. Before I go into specifics. So what we have here is, first of all, it's Westerns. So I have a typical Boot Hill graveyard here, where I say, here lie Westerns, hanged in 1975. And I just chose that because that's sort of about the year when they fell out of favor and there weren't as many Westerns. This grave was Billy Blanton, Tom McLaury, and Frank McLaury, and it says murdered in 1881. This one was just a cute headstone, indicative of some of them at the time, where it actually said how they died. John Heath, taken from county, lynched February 22nd, 1884, I think. None of these pictures were found together. This is all a composite I put together, which is partially why this all takes so long. And here we have a fun fact. This main tombstone, the one that I modified for Here Lie Westerns, is actually Billy the Kid and pals. And then Blanton and McLaury brothers were killed by the Earps at Doc Holliday at the gunfight at the OK Corral. So I thought that was befitting a Western page. And we just have some poker chips and a gun and some cards. We have a Wild Wild West spread I'll get to in a moment. Just a horse with a saddle. We've got the Rifleman spread I'll get to in a moment. And of course, we've got the main character from the Rifleman, it's Chuck Connors. Over here we have the blacksmith with the bale of hay, which you can't really tell. We've got a Wells Fargo bank, a couple of bank robbers out front, post to tie up your horse. We've got the hotel, just a cowboy standing up on this balcony, which was kind of tricky to make. Yeah, it was all tricky to make, what can I say? And down on the main floor we have some frontier women course, there's a boardwalk that's elevated that's running through the town. And things like this hotel, I mean, I made from finding some wood, making it blue, finding some windows, pasting them in, finding some doors, putting them together, making these wooden supports, you know. And then here we have a gunfighter, some more boardwalk, and we have the jail and the sheriff, which is a brick building. It's bars on the windows. Out in front of the sheriff, of course, it makes sense we would have Marshal Matt Dillon, who was the main character in Gunsmoke. Get to that in a moment. Here we have the Long Branch Saloon, which was also from Gunsmoke. It was Miss Kitty's with a woman of the evening and a couple of cowboys standing out, some bad guy behind a barrel, and the Long Branch Saloon. And boardwalk. We've got a little sign that points over there. It says Indian Territory that way. Over here was a sign that was to the mines that way. We got a hay wagon. And over here, I've got something behind there I'll show you in a moment. We have a dead guy. And this spread, which is the Big Valley and Bonanza. So we can start with, and of course all the characters aren't to size, scaled, even respective to each other, because Chuck Connors and James Arness were the main characters, so I wanted them to be larger than life. So we'll start with The Rifleman. That was one of my favorite shows. Here we have his very famous rifle. You'll notice this extended loop, and there's actually a set screw on the trigger, which was a modification, and some posters from The Rifleman. And this, of course, opens. Get behind this horse. Let's see what we're doing here. And so we have the main characters. Chuck Connors is Lucas McCain, Johnny Crawford was Mark McCain, and Paul Fix was Marshal Micah Torrance. And the blurb I wrote: a Civil War vet buys a ranch, and while raising his young son and teaching him morals and values, helps the town marshal maintain law and order. The 6'6" Connors was left-handed, but could ambidextrously handle the famous Winchester 1892 rifle, and was tall enough to use the modified large ring lever and set screw to enable cocking by spinning, which allowed rapid fire, and that was unusual at the time. It was on ABC from 1958 to 63. And sort of interestingly enough, I was going to put it as a fun fact somewhere, but I ran out of room. John Browning didn't actually design the famous Winchester 1892 rifle until after this series was supposedly set in the 1870s. But that's just one of the many anachronisms of Hollywood. I won't tuck that back in. All right, and then over here we have the Wild Wild West. You might remember the two main characters, and behind there you can kind of see the train. Here's just a picture of the inside of their train car, which was very luxuriously appointed and had a laboratory and all sorts of fancy things. I'm losing the light for some reason. And then this interesting thing was a series of rectangles that had little vignettes of animated parts from the actual show, each different show, and then they would at the very beginning, and in between breaks would animate and then freeze, and then you'd get to find out more about what that episode entailed. So that was pretty cool. So of course, we have to have the train. Da, da, da. All right, so here we have the train. And I will read what we have here if I can. This series was James Bond-esque series set in the Old West, complete with beautiful women, clever gadgets, and delusional archenemies. The fearless and handsome West and master of disguise Gordon were two Secret Service agents who traveled in luxury aboard their own train, the Wanderer, to protect President Ulysses S. Grant and the U.S. from dangerous threats. That was on CBS from 65 to 69. And fun fact about this train, the original train was the Sierra No. 3. It was also used in Gunsmoke, The Big Valley, Get Smart, Petticoat Junction, The Virginian, Unforgiven, and The Lone Ranger. Supposedly one of, if not the most utilized Hollywood trains. And so I changed the 3 to a 5. Is that going to focus? Because at least in the pilot, or possibly some of the episodes, that's what they used for the Wild Wild West. Later, they changed it to an 8, so that when they had to use footage in reverse, or mirrored, they could just mirror it. As I noticed, I found when I was putting the 5 there, and on the other side, I couldn't just flip that, because of course that would be too easy. So this train is 2 cars, little connector in between you can see. Basically boxy, but there are so many ways to make boxes in pop-ups, and none really suit pretty much any purpose I have. But so this one, not that anyone cares, when it folds down, you can kind of see the tops to the boxes actually fold in and down. The front folds out this way. The back folds out that way. That helps give it support. But I didn't want the flat roofs, and I didn't want them collapsing down. So I made this car's flat, but it's glued in such a way that when it folds the opposite way. And then this piece I made extra wide so that when it's fully open, it's sort of rounded, much like a train engine should be. And I just found a riveting pattern, riveting, to use for that. And what we have in the Wild Wild West here is we have Robert Conrad, who was James T. West, in one of his fancy, sexy outfits. Artemis Gordon, who was played by Ross Martin, also very finely dressed always, even when not in disguise. And 2 of the most common archenemies, we had Michael Dunn and Richard Keel, who played the dwarf and the giant, Dr. Miguelito Quixote Lovelace and his faithful companion Voltaire. And so, and here we just have the 2 main characters in their typical attire. So did I cover everything there? I think I did. All right. And then we have James Arness in Gunsmoke, standing in front of the jail, of course, and the Long Branch Saloon. And Gunsmoke. Outlodge and Dodge City have no chance with U.S. Marshal Matt Dillon in charge. His sidekicks help him keep the peace, while Kitty runs the Long Branch Saloon and crusty old Doc treats the sick and injured. We have James Arness, who was Matt Dillon, and Amanda Blake was Kitty Russell. Milburn Stone was Doc Adams. Dennis Weaver played Chester Good. And Ken Curtis was the very funny Festus Hagen. And that ran on CBS from 1955 to 75. CBS's longest running Western, and I believe the longest running Western. And then we just have a dead guy for effect. And then we have Bonanza and the Big Valley. Of course, the famous map of Virginia City and the Ponderosa, relatively near Lake Tahoe, and the Big Valley. I like to maximize my space. So I put two things here. So this opens. So Bonanza, it opens up with a twist and fold mechanism to show the cast. We have Lauren Green, who was Ben, Dan Blocker was Hoss, Michael Landon, Little Joe, and Pernell Roberts was Adam. Here's a cast picture of them. And a fun fact, beginning with the third season, characters and recurring guests wore the same clothing in every episode to make it easier for the stunt doubles and for the editors to be able to reuse stock footage in other scenes. That's kind of interesting and clever. And then my little blurb. I have NBC's longest running Western chronicled the dramas of the wealthy Cartwright family of the sprawling Ponderosa Ranch near Virginia City, Nevada. Ben, widowed 3 times, produced sons from all his wives, each with a distinctly different personality. Adam was an architect, Hoss, the lovable oaf, and Little Joe, the hot-headed youngster. Along with the family's Chinese cook, Hop Sing, together they tackled moral issues, racism, bigotry, and anti-Semitism, and others, and family dynamics, especially with the 3 boys from different lineages, which was all less common in other Westerns of the time. And this ran on NBC from 1959 to 1973. And the song became quite a hit in and of itself, Bonanza. All right, and then this lifts up for the Big Valley. Doo, doo, doo. And I made these guys big, but of course they have to fold into here, and so then I had to set them back, so there's not as much room there to see the poster, which is all right. And a beautiful valley I found. And back there, there's actually some black and white pictures of the cast, but unimportant. So we had Lee Majors, who played Heath. I was actually born on his birthday. Linda Evans was Audra. Richard Long was Jared. Barbara Stanwyck was Victoria. And Peter Breck was Nick. There's just a cast picture of them. Focus. Thank you, camera. And my blurb. Recently widowed, no-nonsense matriarch heads the wealthy Barclay family in Stockton, California. Jared, a respected attorney, was educated and refined, while brother Nick was hot-tempered and always ready for a brawl. Audra was the beautiful but daring daughter, and newcomer Heath, the illegitimate son of Victoria's late husband, had to continually prove himself to be fully accepted into the family. And that ran on ABC from 65 to 69. I absolutely loved that show. So that's pretty much my Western spread, except for a wanted poster after all of this ordeal, which is Wanted, a New Hobby. Once again, I amuse myself. What can I say? So, there we go. That is Westerns. And kind of interesting to think about. It didn't occur to me until after all this. If you'd asked me any shows growing up, if they had single parents, I would have said no. But I think all of these were single parents, except for the Wild Wild West, who didn't have children. Chuck Connors was widowed and raising his son, and I guess we don't know about Gunsmoke, but Bonanza, Lauren Green, the patriarch, was widowed 3 times, so raising his sons alone. And Victoria on the Big Valley was widowed and raising her sons on her own, which is actually kind of surprising for the time. All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed.